Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the module leadership. Now today we're going to explore this particular module, but first I'm going to be hosting and we're going to kind of recap on what Sarah talked about with the previous webinar. My name is Michelle Lambert-Uhas and I work for the Meadows Center for Preventing Educational Risk. I have a special guest today. Her name is Dr. Thea Woodruff, and she is a researcher, a developer, and a professor with the University of Texas with Austin. She also works with the UT Counseling Mental Health Center, and she collaborates with all of the UT faculty in trying to embed wellness practices within their classroom. So you're in for a treat, and she's going to take us through the leadership module and talk about briefly each of the pathways, and then she's going to showcase just one of the pathways so you can kind of get a sample of what that pathway would be like if you were to take it in its entirety. So let's just quickly review before I turn this over to Thea. So as you recall, our project is called TIER, and TIER stands for Tiered Intervention Using Evidence-Based Research. And you'll notice that we are only one of the 9 technical assistant networks funded by Texas Education Agency. You may remember that it was previously referred to as the Intervention Best Practices. Now, our goal for this particular project for TIER is to help schools and districts across the state of Texas develop a comprehensive and coherent plan to support your intervention best practices within your MTS framework. Now, as I said, this particular project, one of our goals were to develop 10 modules, as you can see here on the screen. And as you recall from Sarah's webinar, she briefly explained what each of these modules entailed. But what we're going to do is we're going to focus right here on leadership today. We're going to pull out that module and we're going to talk about just that module. However, I encourage you to continue watching these webinars because each webinar from today forward will be talking about each one of these modules and the pathways that are included in it. And so let's talk a little bit about a module. When you think of a module, think of it as the umbrella. This is the whole piece, and that's leadership. And underneath that module, you're going to have pathways, or another way to think of pathways is an individual presentation that is underneath that particular module that encompasses it. Now, overall, if you were to take the whole module as an entirety or just take pathways, the whole thing may be anywhere from 3 to 20 hours. So it's more of your choice on how you want to view this particular module. Now, if you choose to do just a pathway, then think of a pathway as designed either to be implemented in entirety, or you condense it, or you can take that pathway and maybe another pathway and combine them together. Just know that when you're thinking of a pathway, they're different. And so it can be anywhere from 20 minutes to 3 hours just for that pathway, depending on the complexity of the content that you're looking at. And so let's go ahead and let's get started on what we're focusing on today. As you can see here, we have our leadership module, and underneath the leadership module, we have 6 pathways. So there's 6 areas that you can learn more about leadership. Now, when we think of leadership, you may think of leadership as only principals or campus leaders or district leaders can view this. However, this can be for anyone because we're all leaders in all of our roles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over to Thea, and Thea is going to share with us what each one of these pathways are, and then she's going to showcase just one of the pathways so you can get a taste of what it's like. Go ahead, and Thea.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. So I am going to show my PowerPoint here and put me in that. So yeah, so I'm going to go through and just talk kind of quickly, obviously, about this module. We have 6 different pathways within the leadership module. And the idea behind this module in general is not to give you a bunch of new information. You're getting plenty of information in the other modules. But the idea behind this module is to allow you to kind of take all of that information that you're getting from across all these different modules about assessment, instruction, intervention, culturally responsive instruction, all these different kinds of methods and areas that you need to be implementing within MTSS to make it as effective as possible, taking all that information and trying to organize it. So trying to think about, so what are we doing now in relation to all these things we've learned? And then what are the things that we need to build into our model that maybe we're not doing as effectively as we need to based on what we've learned from those other modules. So that's the idea behind this. You're not going to get a lot of new information in this particular module. It's really going to be about helping you to organize the information that you've been learning and to kind of put it together in a plan, or if you want to create like a manual or something like that as a district or as a campus, kind of putting this all together and saying, this is what our MTSS framework looks like. So these six different sections or pathways within leadership include creating the instructional program. So that's going to be obviously about core instruction, what that needs to look like, differentiation, those features of effective instruction we talk about, like explicit instruction, modeling, intervention programs. So really thinking through what are all the things we have laid out across reading, writing, mathematics, behavior, all these different areas. And just sort of organizing it and thinking about, okay, so what do we have and what do we not have and what do we need to improve on? And then being able to communicate that with all the stakeholders in your district or at your campus to let them know this is how we do MTSS instructionally. And then the next pathway is going to be assessment. So of course, this is going to be screening, progress monitoring, diagnostics. So you laying out that plan. So what are we doing in those different assessment areas? And then creating some processes around that. So actually using that data. And that's where this gets tricky, is a lot of times we have laid out the different assessments that we are planning to use, but then we don't actually lay out all the processes, the ways that we're going to put these things in place. So the meetings we're going to have, the way we're going to schedule training, the way we're going to meet and talk about this data consistently, and how we're going to help teachers use it, because teachers are going to need help using data, especially things like diagnostic and progress monitoring data that they may not have had a lot of training or opportunity to use. So that's what's in the second pathway. The third pathway is going to be about setting up problem-solving teams. So these people who are going to lead the effort in MTSS and looking at data and thinking through about what that data is showing about instruction and about student progress, professional development. So implementing things like instructional coaching, not just stand and deliver. Stand and deliver is good, and that's going to give you a baseline of information. But really, what other kinds of professional development are we providing in the classroom to really help teachers to implement MTSS well? So doing things like differentiated instruction, small groups, really making sure that we are really helping teachers to understand what this looks like in the classroom. Then there's a little section on MTSS with other programs. So thinking about how MTSS correlates or relates to things like tutoring, special education, and then how do we communicate with parents, caregivers, other stakeholders about our MTSS framework at our campus or in our district. And then the last one, this is the one that we're actually going to focus on today, is creating your plan. So taking all of this stuff that you've learned across all these other modules, across these different pathways where we've kind of analyzed and gone through and seeing what are we doing, what are we not doing, and kind of getting our organizational structure there, and now actually laying it out. So creating a plan, writing a manual, whatever that is, that lets us know, that lets everybody in the district, everybody at the campus know, this is how we do MTSS, this is all the decisions that we've made and how we're going to implement this program, this framework at our campus or district. All right, so that's what we're going to do now, is very, very quickly, we're just going to go through and look at what is in this your MTSS pathway, which is the last pathway of the leadership module. This just gives you an outline. So there's kind of two sections in this pathway. There's the planning, which is the biggest section. That's going to be going through and really thinking through all of these other modules and what have we done and what have we found that we have and that we don't have. And then again, looking at a plan, and I'm going to show you in a second, a big piece of this section is actually writing out a plan. And I have sample plans written out for elementary, middle, and high school that you could take. They're in reading. So you would also need to write them in writing and do them in mathematics and do them in behavior and also maybe in the other content areas, maybe science and social studies. But at least you have one in reading that you can take and you can use as a framework, sort of as a template basically for if you want to create this kind of plan yourself at your district or your campus. Then the second section is evaluating your MTSS plan. I'm not going to go into that much today, but that's basically making sure you're consistently coming back to your plan, evaluating it and thinking through, are we doing the things we said? Are there things we need to tweak? Are there things we need to change based on our student data, what we're seeing and how things are working, not working, that kind of thing. All right, so this is just, we're going to get into talking about, like I said, just that first section, the planning effective MTSS programs and processes. So planning the program, this is of course a big piece. These are all these like basic upfront decisions that you have to make as you're entering into implementing MTSS. So this is things like, what are the core and intervention materials we're going to use? So what programs are we going to put in place in our core or content area instruction and in our intervention materials? Are we going to purchase a program? Are we going to put something like in a tier 2, a tier 3? We probably need to buy some kind of program and get teachers trained on it, or interventionists, or whoever's going to be implementing our interventions trained on it, right? So it's just making those basic upfront decisions. Supplemental materials are the things we need to supplement our core instruction with to make it stronger, to make it more evidence-based. Also, like I said, instructional delivery, those features of effective instruction. So making sure we have explicit instruction, systematic, scaffolding that we're providing, differentiation, those kinds of things. The assessments. So again, this is just upfront. What are the assessments that we have identified for screening, for progress monitoring, for diagnostics? We need to lay those out so people know this is what we're using. And if you're going to be screening, this is the assessment you should be doing in 7th grade, or this is the assessment you should be doing in kindergarten. People need to know what those assessments are, and that's the data they're going to be expected to collect, and then that we're going to be analyzing consistently. The people who are going to be leading this effort, so who are the people at your campus and at the district level, who are those folks who are going to be leading this? And really it's campus level folks, right? So administrators, maybe instructional coaches, maybe lead teachers, whoever those folks are, identifying those people up front so we know who are the people who we can go to who are making decisions about our framework and what's going on within our MTSS model. Scheduling, so scheduling instructions, scheduling assessments, all those things, just kind of laying that out when that needs to happen. And then thinking about our group sizes for intervention. How many students are we going to have an intervention in tier 2 versus tier 3, those kinds of things. So this is actually what I notice in campuses, at campuses and in districts that we do a fairly good job of, is laying these things out, is kind of making these decisions. Not always, not with every single thing, but in a lot of ways having at least most of these things in place, like screening, like our programs, that kind of thing. The problem is this section. So this is the one that I see that districts and campuses don't do a good job of. So they put these things in place and they say, okay, we're doing MTSS. This is actually this part, the processes that go into implementing MTSS, this is the heart of MTSS. So data collection, data management, actually using the data. There is no way to use data effectively if you don't train people up front on the assessments, create a data management system. So you have to collect that data at multiple levels. You have to be able to have it at the district level, at the campus level, at the teacher level, at the group level, maybe if you're looking at intervention groups, and then at the individual student level. So we have to have a data management system that allows us to look at data at all those levels. If you don't have that, it's going to be impossible to do MTSS effectively. Things like making sure we're scheduling our assessments, like I talked about, and checking for reliability. How do you check for reliability to make sure that teachers are actually administering those assessments correctly in a valid way that actually is the way they're supposed to be done, so that we get valid data that we can actually make important instructional decisions from. And then of course, data analysis, actually looking at that data and thinking about, what does this data tell us about students who need to go in intervention? What does it tell us about students in core instruction and grouping? There's tons of different decisions that have to be made with these data. And if we don't have good systems and good processes in place where we're consistently looking at those data and thinking through and helping teachers do that. Teachers can't do this on their own. That's what I see a lot, is we expect teachers to just kind of look at this data and be able to figure out, no, like they need to know where they fit in all of these different levels. So we need to be looking at this data across these different levels. And I'm not talking about STAR data. I'm talking about screening data. I'm talking about looking at diagnostic data. So looking at specific kids and where their specific needs are. And I'm talking about progress monitoring data, looking at data across time. So looking at slope, are kids making the progress they need to be making to get to grade level, or are they not? And then what does that tell us about instruction? And what do we need to go back and do to fix instructionally to make sure they are getting there? There's no way to do all that if you don't have these systems in place. And then of course, lots of decision making. Hopefully you've gone through decision-making module, and there's tons of information in there. We need to be making decisions about all these things: core instruction, moving kids among the tiers, tier 2, maybe back to tier 1 or tier 2 to tier 3 because they're not making the progress. All of those, how are we going to make those decisions? What are our criteria for making those decisions? Are we checking intervention implementation? Do we go in and observe and make sure that teachers are implementing our interventions with fidelity? Do we have checklists fidelity checklists that we use to make sure that we're seeing these components of the interventions that we need to be seeing? How are we evaluating student progress? Do we have student progress reports that we're looking at consistently every week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks? How often does that happen? And what do those meetings look like? Are we setting up those meetings and having those people there to help make those decisions and help teachers to really think through how to get their kids moving in the right direction? This is hard stuff that we're asking teachers to do. So they need as much support as possible. We don't have these systems, these processes in place. There's no way that we're going to help them do it. So we've got to really think upfront about laying all these things out before we jump into, okay, we're doing MTSS. So just thinking about those things. Professional development, of course, not just doing professional development to do it, but actually because it's what we see that teachers need based on student data, and monitoring the program. Again, consistently looking at all of these different kinds of data. So looking at student data, screening data, progress monitoring data, looking at our observation data and connecting that observation data to our student data. What do those pieces of data tell us together? So that's what's in this, what needs to be in this plan. And like I said, you'll see a sample of it when we get to that point. And again, just real quickly, thinking through what is the relationship between this framework, MTSS, and these other things that we're implementing at our campus, like tutoring, special education, and then how are we communicating with caregivers, with other stakeholders about our framework and how it's implementing, and then also individual students. Caregivers need to be able to see their child's data. They need to see their screening data. They need to be able to see their progress monitoring, and they need help in being able to understand what that means for their child from teachers and other leaders at the campus. So understanding that data. So now this is where we have these sample plans like I was talking about. So I'm going to get off of this slide for a second, and I just want to kind of show you what I'm going to end show, and I want to show you just an example of one of these sample plans. So this is a to-do list that you're going to use. This actually has all the to-do lists from across the other 5 pathways of this module. And so these are what you're going to use to kind of check to see, are we doing all these things we need to be doing at our campus to implement MTSS effectively? And then the next, you'll see this handout, if you notice right here, it's 172 pages. That's because it's about 60 pages for each one of these sample plans, sample manuals, if you want to call it that. That's what a lot of the districts I work with call them. These MTSS or RTI manuals that they basically lay out their framework for implementing MTSS. And this is the elementary one. There's a K through 5 one, there's a 6 through 8 one, and then there's one for high school that just focuses in on grade 9, just to kind of start with grade 9 and think about implementing MTSS with grade 9 effectively. And what it does is it just goes through what I just talked about. It goes through the programs, so laying out all these different things. So here's our programs across K through 5 that we're going to be using in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. It's going to go through those features of effective instruction, like explicit instruction, systematic instruction, all these different things we talk about within the features of effective instruction. And then it's going to get into the assessments, it's going to go into scheduling, it's going to go through all those programs, and then it's going to lay out all of the processes. So this is a 60-page document that goes through and lays those out. Now the first 20 pages is really the part where all of that stuff gets laid out. So all those decisions that have been made about programs, about processes we're going to be putting in place. And then the last 40 pages is actually some appendices that will show you examples of schedules and ways to set up data management systems and how to look at the data, instructional coaching, all those things, just so you can get an idea of what these things might look like at your campus. But the idea is behind these manuals is that you can take them and then you can build your own plan or your own manual based on this template. So this just gives you the template that's laid out, and that way you can make sure you include all of these different things, all of these different elements that you need to have in your MTSS framework as a district or a campus. So I just wanted to show you that to let you know that that's there. And there are, like the slide shows, there is an elementary, a middle school, and a high school one. And if your grade levels don't line up exactly with this, that's okay. You can still take these and tweak them. I've done these manuals, I've written these plans for K through 3 campuses, and then 4 through 6 campuses, and then 7, 8 campuses. You can just take it and tweak it however you want based on that. And then again, these are reading manuals. So what you're also going to want to do is you're going to want to think through and create a similar manual for writing, for mathematics, for the content area, other content areas like science, social studies maybe, and then also for behavior. All right. So I am going to, that is me being done. Like I said, I'm not going to go through the evaluation part because we just don't have time for that on this webinar. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Michelle and let her wrap us up.
Thank you, Thea. I appreciate you. See, I told you all were in for a real treat. She has a lot of expertise in this particular area, so please go and check out the whole leadership module and download these plans to look at them a little closer. And join us next week as we continue going through each one of these modules and exploring all the pathways that are in there. Thank you very much, and you have a great day. Bye.